Welcome to the In Defense of the Fence podcast, a podcast where on the fencers go to see both sides just a little bit clearer. I'm Ryder.
And I'm Thinker.
And on today's episode, Project 2025, exclusively what it is and what's in it. Let's go.
Should be fun.
Project 2025, just for anybody out there who's still living under a rock who doesn't know what Project 2025 is, my God, do we have a lot to talk about. We're only going to be talking about some major talking points in it. It is an over 900-page document built by the Heritage Foundation and over 100 conservative organizations, 35 primary authors and editors, but it also, as boasted by the Project 2025 team, has hundreds of contributors, 140 of which are Trump administration officials. Now, Project 2025, essentially in a nutshell, is the next big conservative action plan to usher in the next conservative president with ease. And its basic fundamental goals are dismantling the federal government, putting as much pressure under the president as possible, and altering the foundational democratic values as we know them today.
Yeah.
So it's also one of four pillars that will be available to the next conservative president. Project 2025 is one. The three others are a personnel database, which will allow Project 2025 coalition members to review and voice their recommendations for appointments, a presidential administration academy to teach new hires how the government functions and how to function in their government. Some of those training videos have already been leaked. And a second document called the Playbook, which will include transition plans to allow the next president to implement plans quickly. The reason why they have Project 2025 is because Trump spent the majority of his presidency the first time not really knowing how to transition into it. Thinker, you saw this firsthand where they didn't think they were going to win. So the first year was spent trying to find appointees to have.
Yeah.
This ensures that they don't have to do that anymore. They have people right from day one, which is why it's called Project 2025, to usher in all of the agendas that they have, which we'll get into.
And it's worth noting that if you ask the question, like, well, how close are these administration officials? His running mate wrote the foreword for one of the books that the author of Project 2025 wrote.
Yeah. His campaign advisor, Chris LaCivita, said that this is a pain in their ass. It's a pain in their ass because Project 2025 is notoriously unpopular. And the leader of the Project 2025 has already come out under recorded video saying that Trump knows all about it, despite him not knowing anything about it. And of course, even if he did not know about it and does not know about it, he knows about it now. He's not going to read the whole thing, but he knows about it. Even if he didn't know about it, it would say a lot because as we go through it, it's pretty fucking crazy that 140 of his officials that he endorsed and hired support this. So even if he didn't know it, it's still a pretty stark judge of character.
None of this is just going to be taken from our own, like, we're not just saying this. We went through Project 2025, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about is taken directly from the document.
Just to kind of piggyback on your point, nothing moves the needle more than people actually being caught on camera saying something. It's one thing if you have your crazy aunt or uncle telling you that the candidate is going to do X, Y, and Z, because we're kind of disenfranchised from that at this point. It's another thing if you actually can see the source. So that's what we're going to do to show you that, yes, a lot of this stuff can seem crazy, but it's actually in the document. So we're going to pull it up and we're going to talk about it.
A perfect first example of that is like right in the very beginning. One of their four promises that they mentioned at the very beginning of the document is that they want to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and to protect children. What do they mean when they say that they want to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life? Now, I have personal experience growing up in a Christian nationalist household. When I was younger, my parents adhered to that viewpoint of the world. So I got a firsthand glance at a lot of these things. But a couple of the things that I think are worth noting is that Christian nationalists do not adhere to any law that conflicts with their interpretation of the Bible. To them, the Bible should and is the supreme law in America. And that's whether or not it conflicts with current standing laws right now. Now, their intentions are to ensure that the conservative candidate that they have put in place is somebody that is sympathetic and loyal to Christian nationalist directives. So the question can be asked whether or not Trump is a Christian nationalist. I don't personally think he is,
Mm,
but he is somebody that's easy to manipulate into directives of theirs, because he's shown that, he's prone to flattery and money.
Topic number one, and arguably one of the most consequential topics of the entire project. Thinker, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. Let's get right into it. The topic of the day in Project 2025 is abortion. You can
Mm.
say all you want that Project 2025 doesn't have an affinity for abortion, but they talked about it in the DNC speech. They talked about it at length about how the Republicans aren't pro life, they're pro-choice. We're come to our side. We're just giving it back to the states. It's not a
Mhm.
big issue. There's no abortion ban or there's no federal banning, but Project 2025 has mentioned abortion 198 times throughout the entire document. And like, you tell me any document that doesn't list something 198 times unless it's the name of a goddamn character. All
it's
right.
almost it's almost like it's
Yeah.
important to them.
Yeah. Now, they don't explicitly say that they're going to talk about a ban, but if you look here on page 6, they're actively celebrating. It says, "We have finally conservatives should gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, overturning Roe v. Wade." Trump has actually claimed responsibility for overturning Roe v. Wade, which is why we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
Also, there's a ban on federal funding of abortion and drugs like mifepristone, which is a big, big deal. Now, also, one of the other main issues that they talked about, and they even talked about it in one of the debates, I can't remember which one, but they talked about an abortion registry, a data collection of people who get abortions, of people who are
Yeah.
pregnancies, miscarriages, and then categorizing. And then Trump and the right, they claimed it wasn't in there. They're not trying to do that. Well, here, conveniently on page 455, accurate and reliable statistical data about abortion, abortion survivors, and abortion related maternal deaths are essential to timely, reliable public health and policy analysis.
Yeah.
Literally under the category of data collection. Under under the CDC, literally says the Department of Health and Human Services should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. Also, it should be separated by category, like spontaneous miscarriage, treatments that incidentally result in the death of a child, such as chemo, stillbirths, induced abortion. And then one of the most damning parts of it, the CDC should require a monitoring and reporting for complications due to abortion and every instance of children being born alive after abortion. So you don't need to take my word for it. It's literally in the
It's
document. They
in
are
there.
like, this is one of the craziest things I've ever seen implemented as a policy recommendation, a literal registry for people who are going through the abortion process. And it is one of the most sickening parts
Yeah.
of this, which is why the
Yes.
Harris campaign is using this as their flagship policy, because it is
And
pro women's rights and it is anti whatever this is.
And the Trump campaign is denying that they know anything about Project 2025. But again, 140 members of Trump's staff are connected to this.
Even if on the off chance Trump actually didn't know about it, which we know it's already been debunked, he does. Trump is a Trojan horse to movements like this, because they're
Yes.
saying for the next conservative president, they didn't say the next
Yeah.
conservative president has to sign on to this. They said
Yeah.
that this is going to happen. And of all people, we know that Trump would be the one to assume more power. That's all his MO has been his entire
Yeah.
administration. This
Yeah.
gives him a roadmap to unmitigated power, including
Yes.
things like the Department of Justice, the FBI, education, and and and
And
and abortion and people's reproductive health. Also, Page 461. Aggressively implement a plan to pursue and fund ethical alternative methods of research in order
Mhm.
to ensure that abortion and embryo destructive related research, cell lines, and other testing methods become fully obsolete and ethically unthinkable, otherwise known as defunding abortion research. So you like
Yes.
all of those stories of people talking about abortions going badly or finding innovative ways to make abortion cleaner, healthier, more fruitful to the woman. That's all gone
All
out
gone.
the window. So you can, again, you can say, I guess, if you really wanted to, that you aren't for an abortion ban, but you're banning and defunding abortion research. You're trying to ban mifepristone, and they want to literally ban the word abortion from all
Mhm.
legislation.
Yep.
That is an abortion ban in the shadows.
You're quite
And
literally banning abortion if you're banning the word abortion.
this is the part that I think people need to hear the most, is that there's
Mhm.
only one side who's considering doing something like this to women's reproductive health and
Yes.
rights. But understand there's a very big difference, because Trump will say when pressed with this issue that he is doing something good, and he's saying he's sending it back to where everybody always wanted it, which is the states. That is still not the same as saying that you were giving people the choice, because as we
Yeah.
all know, if you're at the mercy of whatever your state decides on. And so if
Yeah.
you're in blood red Alabama and you need an abortion because you were raped or you're a victim of
Yeah.
incest or any kind of assault, you don't get that, and you have to
You
move
don't get it.
outside of state lines. The problem is that with Project 2025, even if you move outside of state lines, their data collection system wants to record that and wants to
Yeah.
record where you went to, how you got it done, what happened after, and monitor you thereafter. That's the
Yeah.
issue. That's
And
the issue that is
I'm
so
it's
unbelievable.
it's really good that you mentioned that, because there is confusion that a decision being left with the states means that it's being left with the people, and that's not necessarily the truth.
Yes, and also leaving it with the state, it doesn't deter the creation of a data collection system.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
still going to be monitored, and
Yeah.
that's the part that there is no compromise, there is no, he's not giving anybody an attaboy by saying that he's sending it back down to the states, because 1, that's not where people want it, and 2, that is exactly what will happen to create every state differently, and it
Yeah.
will make people move over state lines to get the procedure done, and it will further the creation of a data collection system.
Yeah.
Like, that is the
It's
only way that this
terrifying.
works. We're gonna say this many times. If you do not want this to happen, it is not enough to just not vote.
Yes.
That's it.
You
It is
have
not enough
to
to just
vote.
not vote, because not voting actually helps enact this.
Another thing that Project 2025 talks about in length is the number of government establishments that they want to dismantle. And it is staggering how many, what many would consider essential government establishments, they want to dismantle. For example, NOAA, DHS, the Department of Education, TSA. They want
Yep.
to dismantle and redistribute all of these organizations and replace the nonpartisan civil servants that run them with loyalists to the president. Now, on page 664 of Project 2025, this is regarding NOAA. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration should be dismantled and many of its functions eliminated, sent to other agencies, privatized, or placed under the control of states and territories. In the light of Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, I don't understand in any way how this is a good idea. How are you going to dismantle the organization that is responsible for giving people early warning of natural disasters? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, it literally was the system that just saved hundreds of thousands of people,
Exactly.
like, a month
Um,
before the election, and it sucks that they're part of the electorate, talking about the election talk right now, but, like,
yeah,
you're literally talking about cutting funds for the service that they just did, saving people's lives.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
I don't understand. It should be a shoo-in for something like this, the same way that the federal defense spending budget is passed every year without a wink of an eye.
Yeah. Another one that they want to dismantle is the Department of Homeland Security.
Yay!
Department of Homeland Security is the organization that is responsible for keeping America safe from foreign and domestic threats. Our anti-terrorism unit runs through the Department of Homeland Security. Our cybersecurity runs through the Department of Homeland Security. They want to combine the Custom and Border Protection, ICE, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Resettlement, and the Department of Justice Executive Office of Immigration Review and the Office of Immigration into a standalone border and immigration agency at the cabinet level. What does that mean? That means that all of those agencies will be under the purview of the president. Just a couple of other things. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency will be moved to the Department of Transportation, which is why?
Well, it's just like what like in cybersecurity. I mean, that includes like Russia. It's like the man like laying down asphalt is now in charge of defending against the Iranians. Like, I don't think he's equipped for that, man. It's synonymous with the idea that we just write all of these like really crazy ideas, and then at the end, it's like, and I get the last popsicle.
Yeah.
It's like that had nothing to do with anything. And I'm going to like rearrange all the spices in your spice cabinet. Go.
Yeah.
Enjoy chaos.
On the Department of Justice, I believe that you actually have some specifics on that, Ryder.
Yeah. So
you sound so thrilled to talk about
it's amazing. Okay, so Project 2025 is planned for the Justice Department. So the Justice Department, you know, judges, lawyers, FBI falls under the purview of the Justice Department. The main idea of Project 2025 is filling it with more political appointees and litigation consistent with the president's agenda. The two things that I find noteworthy on page 559, and if you're listening to this, we'll have this in the description. If you guys want to go and read Project 2025 for yourself, we'll have the link to it in the description below. It says, ultimately, the department will have to make tough calls as it manages its litigation, but those calls must always be consistent with the president's policy agenda and the rule of law. This is fucking crazy. Because
nuts.
saying that it doesn't matter what kind of investigative work you do, as long as it's consistent with the president's agenda, then it's fine. What does that even mean? Also, the most what I find mildly entertaining about this page, there's a quote in here that's saying how U.S. attorneys and administrative officials and judges might not take any certain positions by writing public letters of protest and by engaging in faux resignations from certain internal appointments. This can cause the department to take positions that are inconsistent with the interests of the president, to which I say, no shit. That's the whole point of being an impartial judge. When you take an oath, it's not saying that I'm going to do whatever the president says. It says I'm going to follow the truth and the rule of law. This shouldn't have to be explained. I don't understand like why this is even in here, but I do, because they're saying that this is all going to fall under the purview of the president. For example, let's talk exclusively about the FBI. Page 552, the director of the FBI must remain politically accountable to the president. The fact that the word director of the FBI and the word politically is in the same sentence is mind-blowing, unless that sentence says the director of the FBI must stay so far away from acting politically. That makes sense. This one does not. Page 552 says the director of the FBI must remain politically accountable to the president. Thinker, do you believe that the director of the FBI should remain politically accountable to the president?
No.
Oh.
No law enforcement agency should ever be accountable to one individual. It flies in the face of every democratic system in this country. That's the sort of things that dictators do to consolidate power. Saddam did it. Hitler did it. Stalin did it. Mussolini did it. That is a direct attempt to consolidate law enforcement power under one individual, and will give them essentially the right to just send out the Department of Justice against his political opponents. And Trump has said that he would want to prosecute people that stood against him under the guise that, you know, they interfered with the election or they stole the election or something to that effect. But
not even that. I mean, like,
essentially give him the power to do that.
Not only that, like, let's take a step back from the plan and let's look at the man with the plan. Like you were saying, talking about Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump has tried twice with two separate US attorneys to arrest Hillary Clinton. He's talked religiously about jailing political opponents, about revoking licenses and arresting staffs of news corporations who he does not agree with. This person would absolutely love to have the leader of the investigative department of the FBI to be politically loyal to him. And this is what
Yes.
we mean about career civil servants. Yes, the president has the power to appoint the director of the FBI, director of the CIA, but making it politically accountable, they should not be politically accountable. That's exactly why they have these barriers and guardrails in place. Also, moving on, page 330 says the
Mhm.
OCR should move to the Department of Justice. What is the OCR? The OCR is the Office for Civil Rights, should move to the Department of Justice. The problem with that is if the Department of Justice is reporting directly to the president under the president's specific policy, then the Office of Civil Rights now becomes corrupt and directly
Mhm.
loyal to the president's agenda.
Yes.
So, for example, if President Trump, and we're going to only talk about Trump because this is for the conservative president, if
Yes.
President Trump doesn't view your civil rights as important, the Office of Civil Rights becomes null and void.
Now, a specific example of that would be if you are an immigrant, you are subject to certain civil rights in this country. If he has that power, that civil rights organization no longer protects you. You
Hmm.
know, that is to say, they no longer protect you if Trump's view on you being an immigrant is that you don't belong in this country.
Well, also not even just like immigration, but just your basic right to vote too. Like
Yep.
all the conservative efforts to try to make it harder for certain people to vote. If you view voting as your civil right, which it is as an American citizen, that now
Mhm.
falls under the president's agenda. And if the president doesn't view your ability to vote as a civil right,
Yeah.
to-
Then, and yeah,
and that's the
because
that's the
he's
problem.
been saying that they've been padding the Democrats have been padding the vote with immigrant votes.
Well, that's the problem is that what they're saying as an official civil right that is almost guaranteed in this country is now going to be litigated in court on a maybe. And
Yeah,
that's the scary thing
yeah,
is that you are going to be prosecuted by a politically motivated Justice Department. Your civil rights are dependent on what the president views as important or not. And as we've seen from Trump, he doesn't view a lot of civil rights as important other than the Second Amendment and the
yeah,
First Amendment, as
yeah,
long as they're talking favorably about him.
yeah.
There's a reason why he wants to defund PBS, NPR, ABC, and CBS because he doesn't like how they talk about him. Fox is doing just fine. It's freedom of speech asterisk or but.
Yes. Again, another example. Putin has a similar system set up in Russia, where
Mhm.
people get arrested for speaking out against the Kremlin. This is
Yeah,
essentially
yeah.
the same thing where he would weaponize the Justice Department to go after people, journalists, news reporters, anybody who has a bad thing to say about him, he could use it to go
Yeah.
after them.
Last point, prohibiting the FBI from engaging in general in activities related to combating the spread of so-called misinformation and disinformation by Americans. Cool. Great. What like 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 you want to stop the FBI and literally make it illegal for them to investigate misinformation. Like
you
what the fuck are we doing? This is why it's so unpopular, even with Republicans, because this shit is stupid.
People in Florida have been forming militias to push FEMA workers out of devastated areas based off of misinformation. FEMA workers are being threatened by people with guns when they're trying to help people in devastated areas because of misinformation. And you want to eliminate any sort of regulation on that?
Mm,
How is that going to make anything any better? This country is in the position it's in right now because largely due to people's inability to believe
mm.
anything they hear,
Yeah.
and they question everything. The large number of undecided votes this election cycle is, I would imagine, at least some of them are due to the fact that they don't know what the truth is anymore.
Yeah. And the most interesting thing I want to highlight here is this word right here, plausible, because it says
Possible.
it's banning the FBI from going after spread of misinformation or disinformation by Americans who are not tied to any plausible criminal activity, by saying that just because they're saying something's not true, it doesn't mean that anything criminal happened from it, or I don't view this as plausible criminal activity. What exactly is Trump in court right now for the
Mhm.
2020 election, for
Oh,
spreading misinformation, for election fraud, for January 6th, saying that he's not tied of it? The fact that they implemented the word plausible criminal activity, you could say, oh, yeah, but they weren't doing anything criminal. That's exactly the argument that Trump is trying to make right
yeah.
now in separating himself from January 6th, from any kind of election denialism, by saying nothing criminal happened here. The entire motive for this, if you want to take away anything from this, is that they want to remove the ability to find the truth from the FBI. That's it.
Yeah.
That's really it.
Yeah.
Moving on.
The Department of Education, they want to reestablish, redistribute, and dismantle the entire Department of Education and build it back up in a system that is more privatized and more adherent to their beliefs. They want to redirect
Yay.
public school funds into private and religious schools. As stated on page 347 of Project 2025, Congress should additionally deregulate the program by removing the requirement of private schools to administer the DC public school assessment and allowing private schools to control their administrative process. What does that mean? That means that private schools would not have to adhere to the standards of education that are in place as of now. Right now, there are specific standards that all schools have to meet in order to prove that they are, you know, actually educating kids. This would essentially take those regulations and eliminate them and allow the private schools to teach what they want. They don't have to teach what they believe to be anti American ideas, but in reality, is just the truth about what actually happened in American history. They would
Mhm.
eliminate the need for schools to teach about slavery, or at least teach about slavery in its reality. They could whitewash it, so to speak.
Mhm.
One of the things that the Heritage Foundation wants to establish is something called the Parents' Bill of Rights. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier with the parents having the right to sue schools if they feel that those schools are not teaching their kids appropriately. Education would be different county by county, state by state. Nothing would sync up. Everybody would be taught different histories. And if you want to find a way to increase the division within this country, that's the way to do it. If you allow states in the South to teach their version of history and you allow states in the North to teach their version of history, eventually the divide that already exists in this country is just going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
This is where the chaos comes in, because like it falls in line, everything builds upon the last thing that we talked about in Project 2025. So you look at something like this, where they're eliminating the idea of like what a fact can be by allowing education to vary
Yeah,
dependent on what a child's parents wants them to learn. And if
yeah.
you're allowing them to skew that sense of what is real and what's not, the general sense is you would want to dispel any misinformation. But if you're banning the FBI from going after misinformation, then nobody is going to have an idea what the truth is, because nobody is going to be held accountable for the truth and the lies.
Yeah, and another aspect of this is that the government would have to satisfy strict scrutiny, which is the highest standard of judicial review when the government, quote unquote, infringes upon a parent's rights with their kids in the classroom.
So essentially, what you're saying is that they're making it harder for the government to regulate
Yes.
education as they are
There
now.
may, yes,
God forbid
yes.
that one person who has Holocaust denialism or 9/11 truther or flat earther, that person
Mhm.
has a kid in your
Yeah.
school now. And what this is essentially saying, with all the Department of Education changes, is that that person has a say in your child's education.
It comes down to the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If the loudest parents are the only ones talking, then those are the regulations that are going to be implemented in schools.
We talked about some of the main talking points. There are lots more. We're going to go through a few of them really quick. So, for
Yeah.
example, here on page 696, taxes, everybody's favorite topic, taxes, enacting a simple two-rate individual tax system of 15% and 30% that eliminates most deductions, credits, and exclusions. The corporate tax rate would also be reduced to 18%. Mind you, this is exactly what Trump did in his first term, where he lowered the tax rate down to 25% from 31%. He wants to do it again to 18%, which again did not pay for itself. He thought it was
Yeah.
it's trickle down economics, which if you don't know what that means, it means the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah.
Enacting a simple two-rate individual tax system of 15% and 30%. All you need to know is that the lowest income people would be getting taxed at 30% when they're only getting taxed at like 22, 18%. So their taxes would go up and the richest of the rich taxes would go down. That's all
Yeah.
you need to know. It's adding to the fact if the corporate tax rate wasn't bad enough last time, this time the richest get richer and the
Hmm.
poorest get poorer. We are
Yeah.
eliminating those classes and creating a massive wealth gap that cannot be recovered. Now,
And this is the reason. This is one of the reasons that Trump has support from so many big businesses,
mhm.
is because they understand that if Trump gets elected, their bottom line gets bigger.
Yeah. So every time you hear that Project 2025 or Trump are for the working man, the people making the lowest wage, the people who are on minimum wage, like the people who work at McDonald's, it's not true.
Yeah.
All right. Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, for those who don't know, is America's bank. Free banking. The Federal Reserve is effectively abolished, and the Department of Treasury largely limits itself to handling the government's money. Essentially, what it means is that the Federal Reserve, America's bank, is going to be put in the hands of private banks. Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. Those same banks, again, mind you, that were responsible for the 2008 financial mortgage collapse that affected the entire world. Those banks
Yes.
are in charge of your money. They're in charge of Social Security. They're in charge of pensions. They're in charge of every bond rate setting in the future.
Isn't the Federal Reserve in charge of printing money as well?
They're in charge of printing money, which they talk about how, which
So
they talk about.
we are giving banks, private banks, the ability to print money.
But they will say, I will say in Project 2025, they do say that it's a good thing that you're having privatized banks control the printing of money because they will be competitive with each other. Which, if
Mm.
there's anything you want in America's financial banking system, it's the ability to compete with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we don't want capitalism in the banking system. Like,
No, we
that's
the banking
exactly,
system the banking system is part of capitalism.
dude,
Like
it's
it's part of
exactly.
the establishment of capitalism. You're essentially taking a chunk of of capitalism and separating it from the whole.
Dude, it's exactly why we created subprime mortgages in the first place. And if you want
Yeah.
to know anything about what happened in 2008 and why the whole world almost financially collapsed, go watch The Big Short because it's an amazing movie. Now let's go through some honorable mentions, Stinker. What say you? Honorable mention
Absolutely.
number one, mass deportation on page 142, talking about ICE and expanding mass deportation. Page 789, they talk about banning TikTok. So if you like TikTok, that's gone too. Page 266, backing out of World Health
I love this
Organization,
one.
backing out of the World Health Organization and various UN agencies. Page 468. Adding work requirements and match Medicaid benefits to beneficiary needs, making it harder to receive healthcare benefits. So they're not actively saying that they would overturn Obamacare, but they're going to make it a lot harder for you to actually receive the coverage
Yeah.
that you're facing. So if you're under that
Yeah.
coverage right now, get ready because there's going to be a lot more work to be done to actually get that coverage. Page 582, lastly, reverse the DEI revolution in labor policy. So any diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are gone from any kind of legislation. So if you're a
Yeah.
minority or if you're a part of a group that's been disenfranchised that could use equal equality,
Yeah.
every initiative in favor of any minority or gender equality inclusion gone.
Yeah. Gone. That was designed to make things a little bit more equal. You eliminate that and you now have a system where it goes back
The fuck was
to
that?
what?
What was
Sorry.
that? You're
Sorry.
like,
Sorry. I was putting a sock
oh,
on.
True, like an exorcism. What you essentially need to know about Project 2025 is it is the conservative plan to consolidate control straight up the chain to the president.
Yep.
That's it. And there are all these
Localize
four
all the power
courses.
with one person.
Yeah. And they're literally
Because that's
calling it,
always worked well in history,
yeah,
right?
the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. And if you think that it doesn't have religious undertones in it, the word religion is in the document 100 times, and if you think Trump has nothing to do with it, Trump's name comes up in this document 270 times. It's pretty damning.
270
270 times.
times.
And
Like,
if we know anything from this, that Project 2020 is one of the most extreme policy agendas that we've seen in recent time, completely dismantling everything about the federal government. And understand that if you're feeling disgusted by what this is, by its attack on abortion rights and reproductive health, its attack on education, on the bank, on your social security, it's an attack on just freedom of speech, civil rights. If you're affronted by any of that and you think that any of your freedom shouldn't be held under one person, I don't care if it is Donald Trump, any one person, any one president, by saying that I'm going to use the military and the
mhm.
Department of Justice to my political policy.
Yes.
That is unequivocally wrong on so many levels for anybody. This is their plan.
The beautiful thing about this is that we have the power to take that fear and use it for something productive. We have the ability to go out on November 5th and vote. In some
Or
cases,
before.
you don't even have to wait till November 5th. Early voting is open in many states already. I know
Mhm.
for New York, we don't, it's not quite here yet. I think it's the 26th for where I'm at, but
Yep.
like,
So you're saying it's not enough to just stay home?
no.
Oh,
If you're at home and you're scared but you had no intention of voting, I can guarantee you that you will feel less scared if you go out and make an effort to make sure that this doesn't happen.
have a plan. Always have a plan. Go or do early voting if you can, because if you have a problem with your registration, it's best to find out now
Oh
than
yeah.
on election day. And when you're
Yeah,
standing in
for
lines, yes, it
sure.
can be overwhelming, but you can find, we will put vote.gov down in the links below to help you
Mhm.
figure out when your registration is, find out where the early poll sites are around your area, and figure out a plan to vote. It is essential to do.
Yeah.
The last thing that you want to do, and then Thinker and I talk about this all the time, the last thing that you want to do is wake up on November 6th and wish that you did something.
Yeah,
That's
for
exactly
sure.
it.
Yep.
And understand all that this is trying to do is show exactly what the policy actually is. You can talk about McDonald's, you can talk about Arnold Palmer all you want. All of those are strategic plans to get you to not look at this. It's been
Mhm.
a while since Project 2025 has been in the limelight. The last time we talked about it was probably at the DNC convention
Yeah.
when they talked about it with Keenan Thompson and the giant book on stage. It's kind
Mhm.
of fell silent to everything else in trying to define who Kamala Harris is.
Yeah.
Now is the time to remember what
Yeah.
this policy actually is. And the only way to stop it is to do something at the polls.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 2 weeks until this nightmare is over. And then we have about 3 months of litigation in the courts. So I can't wait.
I love how we already know that that's where it's headed.
It's so good. You just want to take up drinking. Oh, God. But until then, stay informed. We'll have a link to Project 2025 down in the description below. Like we said, make a plan to vote. I'm planning on voting this weekend. Thinker's probably going to
As
vote
am
as soon
I.
as he can
As
figure
am
out what
I.
county he's in or what registration status he's under, because he just moved.
Keep thinking critically and go out and vote.
Keep thinking critically, go out and vote, and we'll see you at the polls.